The moment I told my mother I'd lost the house, she didn't say a word for 4 full seconds. Then, well, that changes things, doesn't it? Not "are you okay?" Not "what happened?" Just that. Cold and immediate, like she'd been waiting for the opening. My name is Skye Remington. I'm 31 years old, and until 8 months ago, I thought I had the kind of family that showed up. The kind that drove through a February snowstorm to help you moved boxes, that called just to check in, that meant it when they said they loved you. I believed that for a long time, longer than I should have. My grandmother, my father's mother, passed away in March of last year. She was 84, sharp until the very end, and she left behind a property in Prince Edward County that had been in our family for 3 generations. The farmhouse itself wasn't much to look at anymore, but the land was 42 acres of waterfront. In Ontario's current market, it appraised at just over $1.8 million. She left it to me, not to my parents, not to my uncle, not split between the grandchildren. To me, specifically, by name, in a will that had been updated and notarized 14 months before she died. Her estate lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Forsyth, who wore the same gray cardigan to every meeting, told me she had been very deliberate about it. She'd even written a separate letter of wishes, sealed, to be given to me privately. I didn't open it right away. I was grieving. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand and told myself I'd read it when I was ready. I never could have predicted what would happen before I got the chance. Within 2 weeks of the will being probated, my mother called me 4 times in a single day. The first 3, I let go to voicemail. The 4th, I picked up because I thought something else had happened. Someone else had died. That's what 4 calls in one day means. It wasn't that. "We need to sit down together," she said. "The whole family. There are things that need to be sorted out before any decisions get made about the property." I said I hadn't made any decisions yet. I was barely out of the grief. "That's exactly why we need to talk," she said. "You shouldn't be making these decisions alone." I noticed she didn't say "we want to help you." She said decisions shouldn't be made. Passive. Like I was a problem to be managed. I told her I'd think about it. The next morning, my estate lawyer called me first. Mr. Forsyth was not the kind of man who called with small talk. When he spoke, there was always a reason. He asked how I was holding up, asked if I'd read my grandmother's letter yet, and when I said not yet, there was a pause. Then he said something that I've replayed in my mind probably 100 times since. "Skye, I'd like you to consider doing something that may feel uncomfortable. Before you attend any family meetings about the estate, I want you to tell them you've received notice of a legal challenge to the will. Tell them the property is frozen and may be tied up in probate litigation for years. Tell them there's a real possibility you may not inherit anything at all." I didn't speak for a moment. "I know that sounds strange," he said, "but I need you to trust me. Say it, and then just listen." I asked him why. "Because," he said quietly, "I've been doing this for 37 years, and I know what I saw in that room when your grandmother signed her final documents, and I think you need to see it too, before it's too late." I wanted to ask more. He said he'd explain everything after. He just needed me to make one phone call first. That night, I called my mother. I kept my voice steady. I told her I'd just gotten off the phone with Mr. Forsyth, and that there was a complication. A distant relative on my grandfather's side had filed a challenge, questioning whether my grandmother had been of sound mind when the will was last updated. I said the property was likely frozen, pending a review. I said I didn't know if I'd see a cent of it. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone absorbing bad news. It was the silence of someone recalculating. "How long?" she finally asked. "Not I'm sorry. Not that's awful. How long?" "Could be 2 years," I said. "Could be longer." She made a sound. Something between a sigh and a dismissal. "Well, we'll have to figure out next steps then. I'll call your uncle." She hung up before I could respond. My uncle, I hadn't even thought of him yet. He lived 40 minutes north of my parents, ran a landscaping company, and had always had a way of appearing at family functions only when something was being divided. I hadn't heard from him since the funeral. He hadn't even stayed for the reception. My cousin, Willa, his daughter, the only person in that family I'd ever truly trusted, sent me a text at 11:30 that night. Just 3 words, "Call me now." I stepped outside onto my apartment balcony in the cold and called her. "They've been talking," she said. She sounded shaken, since before the funeral, actually. "My dad and your mom. I didn't know the details until tonight. He called her after you called her, and I overheard because he forgot I was in the next room." My chest went tight. "What did they say?" She took a breath. "Your mom said, and I'm quoting, 'This might actually work out better for us.' And my dad said, 'If the will gets tossed, it goes intestate, and the family share splits differently.' And then your mom said." Willa stopped. I could hear her trying to keep her voice even. She said, "Skye never should have been the one to get it in the first place. Mom was always too soft on her." I sat down on the balcony chair. The cold didn't register. "There's more," Willa said. "They talked about a document. My dad mentioned something about the original deed, and whether it was possible to have it reevaluated as a family asset instead of a personal bequest. Like, to argue it was always part of a shared family estate." I didn't know the legal mechanics of what that meant, but I understood the intention perfectly. They were going to try to take it. Not openly, not with a confrontation. They were going to quietly maneuver through paperwork and legal theory and family pressure until the property was no longer mine by the time I understood what had happened. I called Mr. Forsyth the next morning, before I'd even had coffee. I told him what Willa had heard. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded like a man who had been waiting for confirmation of something he already knew. "Come to my office Thursday," he said. "Bring nothing. Tell no one." I spent the 2 days in between trying to act normal. My mother called twice. I kept the conversations brief, mentioned the legal freeze again, let her believe I was lost and overwhelmed. My uncle texted once, which was unusual. He almost never texted me directly. He asked if I'd given any thought to the family's position on all this. I didn't respond. Thursday morning, I sat in Mr. Forsyth's office with its stacks of manila folders and its faint smell of old paper, and he laid it out. 3 months before my grandmother died, she had contacted him with concerns. She'd told him that my uncle had visited her twice, without telling anyone else in the family. That during the second visit he'd brought documents, something about a family trust arrangement, and asked her to sign. She hadn't. She'd called Mr. Forsyth the next day, and she'd also called me. I remembered that call now, a Tuesday afternoon, her sounding tired but oddly careful. She'd said she just wanted to hear my voice. I hadn't thought anything of it. She'd been reaching out because she was afraid. Mr. Forsyth had documentation, notes from those calls. A record of the documents my uncle had tried to get her to sign, which would have repositioned the waterfront property as a shared family asset, effectively dissolving her right to bequeath it individually. She had refused. She had then updated her will and added a clause, specific, deliberate, about the farmhouse going to me and only me, with a provision that any legal challenge initiated by a family member would trigger an automatic review of their conduct by the estate. She had known this was coming. She had built a wall around me before she left. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap and tried very hard not to fall apart in front of a 60-something estate lawyer who had, without my knowing it, been quietly protecting me for months. "The challenge your uncle is considering," Mr. Forsyth said, "isn't viable. I have everything I need to counter it, but I want you to have the full picture before we move forward. I also want you to read your grandmother's letter now, if you're ready." He slid it across the desk. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope. I opened it. She wrote the way she talked, unhurried, precise, with a warmth underneath that she never quite wore on the surface. She told me she'd always known, from when I was very young, that I was the one who showed up. Not at holidays, but in the in-between times, the Tuesday phone calls, the drive up to help her with her garden in late September when no one else came. She wrote that the land had been her sanctuary her entire life, and she wanted it to go to someone who understood what that meant. Then she wrote something that cracked something open in me. I know your mother sees the land as money. I know your uncle sees it the same way. I don't blame them entirely. That's what happens to people who never learned to see value in anything that couldn't be sold. But I watched you walk those fields when you were 7 years old, and I knew then that you understood something they never would. The land has a memory. I want it kept by someone who will remember it back. I put the letter down and looked out the window at the February street and allowed myself 30 seconds to cry. Then I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and looked at Mr. Forsyth. What do I need to do? I asked. He almost smiled. Come to a family meeting, he said. Let them make their move. I'll be there. My mother had been trying to organize a family discussion for weeks. I'd been deferring. Now I called her back and said I was ready. She sounded pleased, the specific kind of pleased that made my skin prickle, too warm, too quick. We agreed on a Sunday. My parents' house in Kingston, 2:30 in the afternoon. I said I might bring Mr. Forsyth, since there were legal questions I didn't feel equipped to answer on my own. She hesitated, then said fine. That hesitation told me everything. I arrived 12 minutes late on purpose. Mr. Forsyth's car was already in the driveway, which I hadn't expected. He'd said he would be there, but seeing it made something settle in my chest. I wasn't walking in alone. My parents' living room had been rearranged. The armchairs pulled into a kind of semicircle, the coffee table cleared. My uncle was there, sitting with his arms crossed in the way he always did when he felt entitled to take up space. My aunt was beside him, looking at her phone. My mother had made tea that nobody was drinking. My father sat slightly apart from everyone else. He'd barely spoken to me since the funeral. He looked tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. When I walked in, my mother started immediately. Skye, we've been talking as a family, and we think the most reasonable approach, given the uncertainty with the estate, is to register the property jointly while the legal situation gets sorted, just as a protective measure, so no one party is left exposed. I looked at her. Joint registration between who? The immediate family. She gestured vaguely. Your father and I, your uncle, yourself. My uncle leaned forward. It protects everyone. If the challenge goes badly and there's a court ruling, a jointly registered property has different protections than... That's not accurate, Mr. Forsyth said. He'd been standing by the window. He turned around now and the shift in the room was immediate. My uncle stopped mid-sentence. My mother's expression went very still. Mr. Forsyth set his briefcase on the cleared coffee table. He opened it. Joint registration, in this context, would not protect Skye from a legal challenge. It would, however, dilute her ownership and create a mechanism by which the other parties could eventually pursue a partition claim. He looked at my uncle directly, which I believe was the intended purpose of the arrangement you brought to Mrs. Remington's home in November. The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something true has just been said out loud. My uncle's face didn't collapse. He was too practiced for that, but something moved behind his eyes. A recalculation. That visit was personal, he said. Family. The documents you brought were not personal, Mr. Forsyth said. He slid a folder across the table. These are copies of the arrangement you asked her to sign. You'll notice her handwriting in the margin. She annotated them before returning them to me. She was thorough. My mother looked at the folder and then at me. Skye, this isn't. We're trying to help you. You're 21 years old. 31, I said. She blinked. I'm 31, Mum. You don't actually know how old I am right now, do you? It wasn't an accusation. It just came out. And somehow that small, stupid detail was the thing that made my aunt put her phone down. My uncle pushed the folder back across the table. This is all very theatrical. We're not here to fight. We're here because your grandmother's wishes, whatever she put in that will, don't necessarily reflect the history of that property. My father built the back barn. My mother, your mother, Mr. Forsyth said quietly, left specific written notes about why she did not want you to have decision-making authority over that property. I have those notes. I also have her statement to me. documented that the November visit left her feeling pressured and uncomfortable. He paused. I want to be very clear about where this goes if you pursue a challenge. Your conduct during that visit is part of the record. The clause in the will regarding family-initiated legal challenges would activate, and I have 37 years of estate litigation experience telling me how that ends. My uncle sat back. My aunt looked at him. My mother looked at her tea. My father, who had not said a single word this entire time, stood up. He went to the kitchen. I heard him run the tap. He didn't come back. That was its own kind of answer. I want to be fair, as I said. I hadn't planned to say anything much. But I thought about the comment I'd read once, somewhere. The obvious question that never gets asked in these moments. So, I asked it. You've told me that family matters more than money. I've heard that from both of you my whole life. I looked at my mother, then at my uncle. So I want to understand. If family matters more than money, what were you planning to do with the property if you got it? Nobody answered. Because from where I'm sitting, you didn't call me after the funeral to ask how I was doing. You called me to ask about the timeline. You didn't come to Mr. Forsyth's office to understand Grandma's wishes. You came here today to get me to sign something. I kept my voice even. I wasn't angry. Exactly. I was clear, which felt better than anger. I'm not the one who decided money mattered more than family. I'm just the one who's finally saying it out loud. My uncle started to speak. Mr. Forsyth raised one hand, very slightly, and my uncle stopped. I don't know why that worked. It just did. Mr. Forsyth reached into his briefcase a second time. At this point, I'd like to move to the matter of the trustee arrangement your grandmother put in place for the remainder of the estate's liquid assets, which are separate from the property. He set down a new set of documents. Mrs. Remington Sr. appointed Skye as sole trustee of the family trust account, effective upon probate completion. That account currently holds $340,000 in GICs and a registered savings portfolio. Any distributions from that account are at Skye's sole discretion, going forward. My aunt's head came up. My uncle's expression finally cracked, not into anger, but into something smaller and more honest. Surprise. And underneath the surprise, the particular look of a person who has just realized the floor they were standing on was never as solid as they thought. My mother said very quietly, "She didn't tell us about the trust account." "No," Mr. Forsyth said, "she didn't." What followed was not a dramatic scene. There were no raised voices. No one threatened anything out loud, though I could feel the shape of threats in the pauses. My uncle asked several questions that Mr. Forsyth answered precisely and without emotion. My mother twice started sentences she didn't finish. My aunt left early, saying she had to get back for the dog. Near the end, when it was just my parents and my uncle left in the room, my mother tried one more time. She put her hand on my arm, and I noticed again that she hadn't touched me once when I'd first walked in. The touch only came now at the end when she needed something. "We raised you," she said. Her voice had a tremor in it. "This family gave you everything." I didn't say anything for a moment. I thought about the letter in my bag, about 42 acres of waterfront that smelled like lake water and pine, about my grandmother's handwriting in the margins of documents my uncle had tried to make her sign. "You gave me a lot," I said. "I know that. But Grandma gave me something you never did." She waited. "She paid attention," I said. "She actually knew me." I took my arm back, gently, and stood up. Mr. Forsyth walked out beside me. The afternoon light was doing something soft and sideways across the driveway, the way late winter sun does in Ontario when it's trying to convince you spring is closer than it is. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said, by the cars. "I know," I said. "I just didn't know she was also this prepared." He allowed himself a small smile then. "She told me once that the best thing she could do for you was make sure the walls were already built, before anyone thought to knock them down." He picked up his briefcase. I'd say she succeeded. I sat in my car for a while before I started the engine. I thought about calling Willa. She deserved to know it was over, that she'd done something important by telling me what she'd overheard, that she'd been the one crack of honesty in an otherwise calculated week. I'd call her on the drive home. I thought about my father, standing at the kitchen sink with the tap running. I didn't know what to do with him yet. He hadn't been part of the scheme, as far as I could tell, but he hadn't stopped it either. That was its own kind of choice, and I'd have to figure out, somewhere down the road, what it meant for us. And I thought about the farmhouse. The backfield that went right down to the water's edge. The way my grandmother used to walk it every morning in her rubber boots, coffee in hand, not talking, just moving through it like the land was something you had to greet. I was going to go up in April. As soon as the ground thawed, I was going to open every window and sit on the back step and drink my coffee the same way she did, and I was going to figure out what came next. Not for the money. Not for any of the reasons that had filled that room today. Because she'd known, when she was 7 years old, that some things were worth protecting, and she'd spent the last year of her life making sure I understood the same thing. I started the engine, pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look back.